Welcome to the Ancestral Healing Podcast, a place where we explore ancestral healing, animism, and earth-based spirituality for personal, cultural, and planetary wholeness. I'm your host, Joseph Shumway, the Ancestral Healing Coach, bringing you some magic to reclaim vibrant connection with the earth, your ancestors, and the non-human world. Greetings, dear friends. I'm excited to join you for another episode today. And if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, happy spring. And I hope that the nourishing energy of the Eros and the beauty of the spring from the Mother Earth, the goddess, is moving through and supporting you in very nourishing ways. And if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, feeling that shift as well. And I'm so excited to be able to share some of the teachings with you that can support us in earth-connected practices to weave ourselves more intricately with the natural rhythms and cycles of the earth. And so as we attune with the seasons, there's shifts of energy, and we're probably all feeling that, and in one way or another. And so learning to connect ourselves more to those natural cycles versus the arbitrary calendar systems and structures of the days, the weeks, the months that have been kind of imposed through colonization, imperialization, capitalism, etc., we begin to be able to make space for ourselves to rhythmically mirror the rhythms and cycles of the divine, of nature, of Mother Earth. And that teaches us a lot about our humanity and how we're not much different than all of the other beings who are also part of the natural cycles of life. I want to first start by sharing a couple of upcoming events that I will be offering. Two upcoming in-person events in Salt Lake City, if you are in the Intermountain West and feel called to join me in person, as well as an online teaching. Starting off on April 30th, 2026, I will be doing a free talk in Salt Lake City at the Golden Braid Bookstore, just a basic introductory talk around ancestral lineage healing. That's going to be followed with an online teaching, very similar, but it will be May 13th. This will be a free online teaching event for anyone interested to learn some basics of ancestral lineage healing as a modality, but also I'll be weaving in teachings around how can we use ancestral healing just as a way to support ourselves in these great times of transition. So I will be anchoring the teaching from that perspective, but then also bringing in an introduction to the modality of ancestral lineage healing work. And then on May 16th in Salt Lake City, I will be also offering a one-day intensive workshop. So this will take place at Crohn's Hollow, one of our spiritual metaphysical shops in Salt Lake City. And I'll be holding this one-day workshop where we'll be really diving into the principles and the frameworks that ground ancestral lineage healing work. So a really good way for folks to dive into the work if it's something that's new for you. And you can learn more about these events and register at my website, ancestralhealing.coach. So let's dive into the teaching for today. We're talking about the Wheel of the Year. And this is a really big topic. I am in no way pretending that I'm going to hit all of the components that are here, but I want to offer a basic framework because the Wheel of the Year was something that was really magical for me to step into when I was moving in my spiritual journey and learning different ways of connecting with earth-based practices. It was a really important framework and to give me just some structure to know how do I relate with the earth in a spiritual way. And that's really what I want to talk about today is how the Wheel of the Year gives us a framework, gives us an outline, and then there's so many other layers and places of depth that we can go with it. So one of the things that I want to mention here first is as I was moving along in my spiritual journey, transitioning away from Mormonism, this very rigid, this very dogmatic theological cosmology, it was really hard for me to not want to hold onto something that was very fixed and very rigid. So when I first learned about the Wheel of the Year, I was expecting some kind of fixed rigidity, if you will. And There is some structure to this, but there's also a lot of fluidness and flexibility. And I name that because the Wheel of the Year, as I'm going to teach and present it, is a more modernized framework based on older traditions, primarily from the Celtic and the Nordic spiritual traditions. When I was really moving along in my spiritual journey and was really finding myself connected to the Celtic traditions of my ancient ancestors, I was really drawn to those teachings and really yearning to find this, pure lineage, if you will, of the Celtic traditions. I wanted to understand, how did my ancient Welsh ancestors or my ancient ancestors from Scotland, how did they connect with the earth, and what were the specific traditions, and what were these ideas and rituals and practices and everything. And I wanted to understand these in the same kind of way that I came from Mormonism, this more like, here's all of the teachings very specifically spelled out for you. And what I realized not long into that is that that was a little bit foolish of me, and foolish in the sense of naive, because it was very understanding coming from that framework to want to then move into a spiritual tradition that also had all of this defined structure. So much of those traditions, though, were lost. And as part of that, there have been efforts to reclaim, but then to also give space for newness to show up. How do we weave parts of traditions that have been lost and allow for them to kind of take on new life, if you will, being met with our own new experiences and the ways that we've come to kind of see and experience culture in our current day and age. The Wheel of the Year, as I'm going to teach it, is that kind of a framework, and it offers us a lot of flexibility. Not everything is going to align 100% with our modern calendars or the lunar cycles or other spiritual traditions. And so that's where it can take on a lot of different ways that we can work with it in our lives, however we kind of feel it can be supportive to us. I have found myself incorporating more of the wheel practices now than I did when I first started. And so that's the beauty of stepping into an earth-based spiritual practice, is that you get to try on things that meet you where you are now. And that as you grow and progress, there's so many things available still that aren't going anywhere that you can then pick up and try on again later. So what is the Wheel of the Year, and how is it structured? So the Wheel of the Year provides us a living reminder of the natural cycle of life. And it helps us to see and recognize that same cycle in other areas of our lives and in other places within the natural world. This is what is so beautiful about it. It's a constant reminder of this cycle of life. So nature teaches us patterns of seeing the cycle of birth, infanthood, growing through the fullness to maturity, to aging and decline, and then to death, the composting of the body, and to the then renewal and the rebirth of life over again. This beautiful cyclical circular pattern that we can see mirrored over and over again. And so we see this in many different ways. One is obviously our actual life, birth to death, and then rebirth, if that's part of your tradition, reincarnating again, as most spiritual traditions saw. But then also we can see it in other aspects of our life. Different periods of our life have their own little mini cycles of birth and death, creative processes, careers, relationships. We also see this reflected in lives of our animal friends and family, them coming into our life, being there for a time, and then maybe passing away or transitioning out of it. There's lots of different ways that we can look at the cycle of life and learn how we need to then show up based on where we are in that cycle or where that cycle is within our own lives. So the Wheel of the Year provides us a tangible way to engage with those natural cycles and rhythms, because it teaches us how to embody the specific qualities and the energetics that are part of the different parts of that cycle. So the Wheel of the Year, as I'm presenting it, I mentioned this previously, but it is a modern framework that's come about from late 19th century and early 20th century Wiccans and neo-pagans. So these are people who were trying to kind of reconstruct the lost parts of the European pagan traditions, specifically the Celtic and the Nordic traditions. And so both of those traditions had wheel-based calendars, wheel-based approaches to seeing the year flow. But a lot of those parts have either been lost or parts of them maybe didn't sit as well with the current modern calendars that we work with, social constructs, etc. And so the current modern Wheel of the Year was born as a way to kind of help us reclaim, but also weave in the ancient traditions and the way of seeing the natural cycles of life within our current calendar, our current way of living. So the Wheel of the Year, it's divided into 8 specific segments. These are known as spokes. And I'm going to show an image here if you're watching the video version of the wheel. And I'm also going to provide a link in the show notes where you can download a copy of the Wheel of the Year that I like to use in my practice. And so the wheel is divided into 8 sections or spokes, and they align first to the 4 primary solar events. So 2 solstices, winter and summer, and then 2 equinoxes, fall, autumn, and spring. And from there, we have 4 additional spokes in between, known as the cross-quarter days. So really, essentially, every 6.5 weeks on our modern Gregorian calendar, we're brought to a new turn of the wheel. And it brings us new shifts and changes in the Earth's energy, which then impacts and influences how the land where we're seated is responding and what part of the cycle the land is mirroring. And the 8 turns of the wheel in the Wiccan and the neo-pagan practices are known as the Sabbats. So kind of like Sabbath without the H, Sabbat with a T. And the modern wheel aligns with the modern Gregorian calendar, but it's also to recognize that for ancient peoples, it would have followed more of a blend of the solar and the lunar events. So not necessarily the fixed dates that we work with currently. Rather, they would have followed other lunar events and they would know like, oh, this particular full moon is this particular day. And there's a lot of beauty and complexity there if you want to overlay the Wheel of the Year with the lunar cycles. And the last thing that I want to mention here is that the wheel is mirrored depending on if you're in the southern hemisphere or the northern hemisphere. So it's going to be reversed. So that's important to know because when it's summer in the north, it's winter in the south, and vice versa. So you can celebrate and honor and work with the Wheel of the Year regardless wherever you are on the globe. I want to shift and talk about how we can understand the 8 different Sabbats or festivals, as they're sometimes called, along with some of the other things that we can weave into it, such as the directions and the elements. So like I said previously, the wheel offers us multiple layers that we can kind of work with. And we can kind of work with some parts and other parts maybe we can get into a little bit later. One of those ways that we can overlay it is with the zodiac signs, for example. So there's a lot of beauty and complexity here that we can then bring in when we kind of add in those zodiac signs and the different energetics that come along with the year as we see the Earth moving through those different signs. But I'm not going to get into that particular layer of complexity here. We're going to keep it a little bit more simple to the basics. So I'm going to show right now the image of the Wheel of the Year. And again, if you're listening, you can find a link to this image in the show notes. You'll notice here first that the wheel is divided into 2 parts, a light and a dark half. So we'll kind of start here. In Celtic tradition particularly, it wasn't, oh, there's 4 seasons. It was, there's 2 seasons of light and darkness. So you can see the shaded areas of the wheel here representing the dark half of the year and the light half of the year. On the Wheel of the Year, we start on the new year, which is the festival of Samhain. It looks like Samhain, but it's Gaelic. It's pronounced Samhain. This is known as All Hallows Eve or Halloween, and traditionally in the modern era, it's celebrated on October 31st. So this is when we move into the dark half of the year, and this is the new year. And this is really beautiful and magical because it teaches us that life begins with death. Life begins in the darkness. And I just think that that's such a beautiful principle as we go through each of these different festivals and the different periods of the year. Watch for and see how I describe this, how it also maybe brings up other ideas for you around different ways that this part of the wheel connects you with the cycles of life. So we start with Samhain and moving into the dark half of the year, and then we shift to the light half on the celebration of Beltane, which is May 1st. So you can see that reflected there. And then we move into the light half of the year. One of the other things that is really important with the Wheel of the Year is that we incorporate the different directions as well as the primary elements. So the primary quarter days are associated with the 4 cardinal directions, so north, east, south, and west. And then the cross quarter days correspond to the ordinal or the intermediate directions. So these are the points where we start to see shifts from those anchored cardinal directions. Layered on top of this, as I mentioned, are the elements. So the 4 primary elements we can associate with the directions, air being associated with the east, fire being associated with the south, west with water, and north with earth. I want to acknowledge that there are traditions that associate different elements with different directions. Some traditions flip fire being associated with the east and air being associated with the south. So that shows up sometimes. Other cultures and spiritual traditions also acknowledge more than 4 or 5 elements. So that's also something to consider. The modern Wheel of the Year works with those 4 primary elements, but you can also weave in other elements as well. The reason that the directions and the elements are important is because in a lot of spiritual traditions, the elements carry with them real energetics that impact our bodies and that impact the bodies of other non-human beings. And so the directions associating themselves with the elements are what help to make shifts in the earth. And so noticing how those elements are also impacting our own bodies is something that's very real and something that's very important as we deepen into our spiritual practice, as we deepen connection with our bodies, noticing how different seasons impact our bodies. That's something that a lot of us have been disconnected from. Noticing when our bodies are asking for more rest, when our bodies are asking for more nourishment, when our bodies are asking for a myriad of other things, and noticing then the correlation between our body asking for those things because we're stepping into a new threshold of change within the earth. Our modern capitalist system doesn't honor those things. And so for many of us, this is why we experience burnout and anxiety and other mental health challenges and physical health challenges, because our bodies are pushing against what they're naturally wanting to ask for and receive from the rhythm that is currently moving through the earth at the time. So let's walk through the wheel and talk about each of these 8 Sabbats or festivals and what they mean, what we can learn about them, and how they can give us ways to step into different relationship with the natural cycles of life and relating with the sacred world that we're all a part of. So we're going to start with Samhain, and I'm going to bounce back and forth between the camera and the image just so that you have that visual to continue referencing. But we'll start with Samhain, which is, in the Celtic tradition, the new year. And this Sabbat, this festival, is related to the direction of the northwest. So we're seeing here a blend of the elements of the water and the earth. And so this is where we're seeing the element of water, which carries with it relationship with emotion, intuition, and the subconscious, blending with the earth, which is related to the physical world and the underworld. And Samhain is also seen as a time where the veil is becoming very thin because we're seeing this crossover between the light and the dark halves of the year. And so there's a lot of beauty and symbolism in stepping into the new year into the darkness. We're connecting with our ancestors and we're acknowledging the part of life where we're embracing death after we've moved to a state of elderhood. We'll come back around to that here in the teachings, but basically Samhain is our time to really we're moving out of elderhood and we're really moving into death in our life cycle. And we're being welcomed and received by the ancestors. So Samhain then moves us a little bit further to the celebration of Yule, or the winter solstice. And often celebrated around December 21st. Yule is where we have association with the north and the element of earth. So we're really having a strong connection here with the physical world and the underworld. And this time of great darkness. This is the darkest night of the year. And there's a reason that it correlates with this. And there's so much symbolism here where we're celebrating the return of the light. So we're moving into this darkest part of the year and we're going to start shifting out and welcoming returning light. So this is in the life cycle, we're fully dead and we're allowing ourselves to compost. We're buried. We're in the underworld. We're allowing ourselves to be composted in preparation for rebirth. So we're finding light within the dark and listening in for what is needing to be reborn. So in spiritual practice, I love bringing in this idea with winter solstice and Yule in really cultivating darkness, enjoying the time of rest, and listening in for what is needing to die and what is then perhaps wanting to rebirth in its place. It's another way we can look at that. So you will then move us towards the celebration of Imbolc. It's spelled I-M-B-O-L-K, but it's pronounced Imbolc. And here it's often celebrated on February 1st. And we're associating now with the direction of northeast. So we're seeing now a blend of the earth elements and the air. So we're bringing in that physical underworld energy of regeneration, and now we're blending it with communication, vibration, and connection. And here in Imbolc, we're seeing themes around fertility and emergence. So we're not quite at a place of birth. Rather, Imbolc historically was associated with pregnant ewes, pregnant sheep who were gestating their young who were going to be born in the coming weeks. And so this is where in our own life cycle, we're listening into seeing okay, what's feeling like it wants to be birthed? What do I want to nourish and prepare to birth in the coming weeks? So this is where we see life being eagerly gestated in its mother's womb and being prepared to be born or reborn. And that brings us to the next cycle, which is Ostara, or the spring equinox. And this is often celebrated around March 21st. And I'm recording this in March 26th, and we just moved through Ostara, and that beautiful spring energy is really starting to move here. So we're seeing association now with the direction of east and air. So we're really at the energy of east, which brings new beginning, which brings the rising sun. And we're seeing those associations of the air element, which is the mind, communication, connection, vibration. And Ostara is where we start to see life being reborn, emergence of that life. So in the life cycle, we're celebrating this new birth. And over the next little bit before the next celebration, one being moved from birth through their infanthood. So this real tender, delicate, beautiful expression of new life. And that will bring us to Beltane, which is where we celebrate shifting from the dark half of the year into the light half of the year. And so Beltane is celebrated on May 1st, associated with the southeast direction. And here we're blending the air and the fire elements together. So again, aspects of communication, the mind, vibration, being merged with that fueling energy, the fire, the inspiration, the imagination. These are things that associate themselves with the fire element, or the south, this passion, this creative energy. And in Beltane, we're seeing also re-emerging themes of fertility and creativity. The world is coming into fullness of bloom and abundance now, whereas Ostara, we started to see the percolation of life, new seedlings beginning to sprout. Now in Beltane, we're seeing them really take on fullness. And so in a life cycle, Beltane and that period of weeks around it would teach us the ways in which a child grows into their youthfulness. This space of life that's full of a lot of passion and energy. And that then moves us to the next cycle, which is Litha, or the summer solstice, usually celebrated around June 21st. And here we have real deep connection with the fire element and the south directions. So really deep connection with energy, creation, passion, imagination, and inspiration. All of these kind of qualities here are really in their fullest expression. And we're really seeing these themes of abundance and light and vitality. And in a life cycle, this is where we're really transitioning from our state of youthfulness into adulthood. The height of our life cycle, we're really embracing here. And then eventually we're going to then shift to the next Sabbat, which is Lughnasadh, or Lammas, which is usually celebrated around August 1st. And this associates with the southwest direction. So now we're seeing a shift. We're blending fire, but with the water elements here. So we're still carrying that energy, that passion, that creativity, but we're blending it with the elements of water, which are that emotion, that intuition, that beautiful, like, feminine energy, whereas the fire is often associated more with that masculine energy. We're seeing that kind of blend here. Lughnasadh, or Lammas, is oftentimes known as the first harvest festival. So this is where a lot of times we're seeing a lot of fruits and vegetables who were kind of the earlier ones of the season to kind of come available for harvest. And so there's a theme here around abundance and vitality, and we're seeing and experiencing nature in its real fullness. And so this is someone who has really shifted from their young adulthood into more of their mature adulthood years, where they're a parent who's really enjoying this kind of beautiful experience of having a fullness of connection with their offspring, with their children, and all of the other things that they've nurtured along the way. They're really being able to sit with and enjoy kind of those fruits of labor, if you will. And then eventually, though, we're going to then shift to the fall equinox, or Mabon, as it's known. So usually celebrated around September 21st. Connection with the west direction and water. So very much bringing in aspects of change, connecting with emotion, intuition, healing, and the subconscious. These are themes around water and the western direction. And Mabon also is known as the second harvest. So usually, like, there's other plants and fruits and vegetables that aren't ready to be gathered until a little bit later in the season. So here we're taking advantage of kind of the second wave of abundance. So there is aspects of that abundance here, and the balance of the forces really come together here at the equinoxes. And we're inviting connection to opposites, to paradox. We're holding space for both possibilities. We're allowing ourselves to celebrate life and also look ahead and acknowledge impending death. So this is where in the life cycle we're shifting into elderhood now, we're really seeing and experiencing more of the fullness and the maturity of our labors. That second wave harvest coming really has us looking back at our life and what we've nourished, what we've given life and birth to. And it causes us to then step into this space where we now embrace elderhood, where we now take on a different role in the community of offering our wisdom, this deep connection to intuition. We're teaching that, we're giving it. And it's about slowing down and reflecting and just holding gratitude for what has come through for us in our life cycle, but also across the year, if we're applying this to a celebration of the year, which then returns us to the beginning, which is Samhain. So we're passing now from elderhood to our impending death. We've really aged, and we're really now surrendering, and we're giving ourselves back to the dark half of the year and stepping into that unknown space where new life can begin to start over again in its new life cycle. So that's a little overview of the Wheel of the Year and those different cycles that it represents. And I really find so much beauty and deliciousness in this. And one of the big questions I get from people is, what do I do with this? And what I would offer is start kind of small. If you're new to relating with the Wheel of the Year, or you're just new to kind of earth-based spiritual practices, this can be a really beautiful guide, and you can kind of just start small. When I first started, I only started with like the solstices. They just felt a little bit more accessible, and it just felt a little bit more like energetically alive and intriguing for me. So I started there. And then I started incorporating the equinoxes. I started incorporating Ostara, and I started incorporating Mabon. And then I've started incorporating the other celebrations and cross-quarter days as I've gone along in my journey. So that's a recommendation there. What's also really beautiful here is that for each of the festivals, you can find ways that make sense for you to celebrate. There's no real right or wrong here. There are traditional things that people do or have done for each of these celebrations, and you can do some research about them. And for each of the celebrations, I hope to offer an episode that can go into each of those a little bit more deeply. I also have articles on my Substack that you can refer to for each of the festivals, at least some of the ones that I've done so far. I'll do others as we go along. But you can do other research and find ideas and see what calls to you. There's no right, wrong way to do this. And that's what's also really beautiful about all of this. So I recommend often for people is maybe start with the 4 primary festivals, those cardinal directions, starting with Yule, Ostara, Litha, and Mabon. Start with those ones and see how they feel, or just start with 2 of them. Which ones really kind of call to you? And then start simply. Find some basic things that you can try out. Maybe there's a group of friends or other people that might want to celebrate with you. Invite community in with you to join you in something and see what feels right. And you can always try it again next year and add or incorporate some different things. Because at the end of the day, this is about reclaiming connection to the earth and the forces of nature in a way that feel nourishing for you. The Wheel of the Year is a wonderful technology that we can work with in reclaiming these more embodied and deepened connections with the earth. But at the end of the day, it's a way to teach us how we as humans are not separate from the natural world, and we can step into deeper relationship with the earth and the non-human world by recognizing this beautiful natural cycle of life and the different stages that come along with that, and the different qualities of energy and the different ways that the earth moves through this cycle. We can see that mirrored and reflected in our own life. And that can then teach us a lot about how we need to show up differently for ourselves. Like I mentioned, coming full circle here, it's really taboo to slow down in the winter in our modern capitalist systems. You don't do that. You have a job you have to go to. And yeah, we need to honor and acknowledge where we are right now. Maybe we don't have the ability to completely sign off and slow down in the wintertime just because we have a job that we need to pay the bills. That's real, and we need to acknowledge that. It invites us, though, to ask some questions about, okay, I may not be able to change these things, but where are some ways in my life that I can slow down? Where are some areas of my life that I can bring a little bit more passion, a little bit more creativity in, if we're like then in the light half of the year, if we're coming into the summer solstice? We can find small ways to bring in some of these qualities and to call in energy from the earth and the supportive powers that are moving with the earth, even if we can't fully step back into ways that our ancient ancestors may have been able to live. So just to wrap things up, I hope that this has been an insightful and informative episode and giving you a real overview of the Wheel of the Year and how, as a little bit of technology, it can be applied to help us step into a deeper, more nourishing spiritual path of being in connection with the earth and the non-human world. Like I said, I've linked in the show notes the graphic of the Wheel of the Year, and you're welcome to use that. And I would also love to hear from you as to different ways that you may have gone about celebrating the Wheel of the Year, or if there are questions that you have, leave them here wherever you're listening, or you can connect with me at ancestralhealing.coach, and I would love to hear from you. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. In the meantime, may you be well, may you be blessed. Thanks for listening. If you're being called to reconnect with your ancestors and begin a healing journey with them, I invite you to learn more about my work by connecting with me at ancestralhealing.coach. You can also subscribe to my free Substack, where I share writings, practices, and insights designed to help you find more healing and well-being through deeper connection and relationship with the earth and your ancestors. Until next time, sending you lots of love and vibrant magic.